Part 1. The Quiet Before the Storm. At 90 years old, Clara Hayes possessed a repository of memories vast enough to fill volumes, richer and more poignant than any library could hold. She had navigated the tumultuous currents of the 20th century, her life a tapestry woven with threads of profound joy, searing loss, and unwavering resilience. Her most formative years were spent not in the idyllic countryside she now called home, but amidst the cacophony and carnage of World War II. As a young Army field nurse, barely out of her teens, she'd waded through mud and blood on foreign soil, her hands, often trembling beneath the relentless pressure, becoming instruments of frantic healing. She'd stanched the flow of life draining from young men whose names she barely knew, whispering words of comfort or prayer as their eyes faded, their last thoughts drifting towards mothers and sweethearts oceans away. The war had forged her spirit in its crucible, leaving behind an alloy of compassion and unyielding strength. Time, the great sculptor, had since softened the sharp edges, polishing that strength into a quiet wisdom, a deep-seated kindness that radiated from her like the gentle warmth of her wood-burning stove on a crisp autumn morning. She resided now in solitude, though rarely felt truly lonely, within the walls of a charming, if slightly weathered, white-clapboard cottage nestled on the gentle slope leading out of Harmony Creek. Harmony Creek was a town caught pleasantly out of time, a relic of a slower, more neighborly era nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York. It was the kind of place where screen doors still slammed shut on summer evenings, where neighbors exchanged pleasantries over meticulously kept fences, and where the latest town gossip was served alongside generous slices of pie at Millie's Diner downtown. Her husband, George, a man whose laughter had once filled every corner of the cottage, had been laid to rest nearly 25 years ago, claimed by a heart that had simply worked too hard for too long. Their children, products of a different generation, were scattered like dandelion seeds across the vast expanse of the country, a son engineering bridges in California, a daughter teaching literature in Chicago. They called dutifully, their voices filled with a familiar blend of affection and the subtle distance created by miles and busy lives. Visits were infrequent, marked by loving but slightly awkward reunions, a gentle reminder of the diverging paths their lives had taken. Clara, however, bore no resentment. She found contentment in the rhythms of her quiet life. Her days were anchored by simple pleasures, the meticulous care of her flower garden, a riot of color from spring tulips to late summer dahlias, the companionship of well-loved books, their spines cracked, pages softened with countless readings, and the ritual of rereading the neatly stacked letters from her grandchildren, each tied with a faded satin ribbon pale blue for Jack's, sunny yellow for Emily's kept safe in the top drawer of her antique mahogany nightstand. These small rituals, this peaceful existence, were her sanctuary. But recently, an unsettling dissonance had begun to creep into the familiar harmony of her life. Peace, once a constant companion, now felt like a fragile memory, threatened by a gathering storm just over the horizon. The trouble arrived on two wheels, heralded by the guttural roar of engines that seemed fundamentally out of place in the tranquil valley. A motorcycle gang, calling themselves the Crimson Reapers, had established a presence on the fringes of Harmony Creek several months prior. Initially, their activities were confined to the less populated areas, tearing up dirt roads near Miller's Woods, their raucous laughter and blaring music echoing from late-night gatherings down by the riverbank, leaving behind a trail of discarded beer cans and cigarette butts. The townsfolk grumbled, of course. Complaints were lodged about the noise, the litter, the vague sense of unease the gang's presence instilled. But Sheriff Brody, a man whose tenure had long outlasted his youthful vigor and whose department consisted of himself and one part-time deputy, was woefully ill-equipped and, frankly, reluctant to provoke a direct confrontation. The town council, a collection of local business owners more concerned with maintaining Harmony Creek's quaint image for the trickle of summer tourists than addressing uncomfortable realities, adopted a policy of willful ignorance. They hoped, Perhaps that the reapers were a temporary nuisance, a summer squall that would soon blow over. Their hopes proved futile. The reapers, emboldened by the lack of meaningful opposition, grew bolder. And then their attention fixed, inexplicably at first, on Clara Hayes. It began subtly, almost dismissively. A single, empty beer bottle, inexplicably shattered on the tidy gravel of her short driveway one Tuesday morning. A cluster of crushed cigarette butts ground into the mulch of her prize-winning rose bed near the porch steps. Brightly colored candy wrappers snagged on the spindles of her porch railing, fluttering like unwelcome flags in the breeze. Annoyances, certainly. Disrespectful acts of petty vandalism. But Clara, who had faced down artillery barges and navigated field hospitals overflowing with critically wounded men, was not easily ruffled by such minor provocations. She muttered a quiet curse under her breath, a habit George had always teased her about, swept up the glass shards with methodical care, plucked the cigarette butts from her roses with a grimace, and disposed of the candy wrappers. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her upset. But the reapers interpreted her stoicism not as resilience, but as weakness. The harassment escalated, shedding its cloak of petty annoyance and revealing a more deliberate, menacing intent. They started making nocturnal visits. The throaty rumble of their motorcycles would shatter the nighttime quiet, engines revving in aggressive bursts directly outside her cottage. The vibrations shook the old window panes in their frames, rattling the delicate teacups displayed in the glass-fronted cabinet in her small dining room. Sometimes they would cut their engines and just sit there in the darkness, unseen figures astride silent machines, a palpable, menacing presence. Other nights, a motorcycle headlight would suddenly pierce the darkness, shining directly into her bedroom window, bathing the familiar floral wallpaper in a harsh, invasive glare, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like malevolent spirits across the walls. Clara Hayes didn't frighten easily. She carried the indelible memories of wartime horrors, images far more terrifying than shadows on a wall. Yet, even she couldn't deny the cold tendril of unease that began to curl in the pit of her stomach, a creeping dread that settled deep within her bones. It wasn't just fear for her safety. It was the violation, the intrusion into the sanctuary she had so carefully cultivated. Still, the thought of abandoning the home George had built with his own two hands, the repository of their shared life, was unthinkable. This cottage wasn't merely wood and plaster. It was woven from memories, laughter, tears, and decades of unwavering love. She wouldn't be driven out. Not by them. One particularly oppressive evening, after a prolonged assault of engine noise and mocking laughter that seemed to scrape against her last nerve, Clara made a decision. She drew her faded chenille robe tighter around her frail shoulders, slipped her feet into her worn, comfortable slippers, and grasped the smooth, familiar handle of her sturdy oak cane. With measured steps, she shuffled out onto her front porch, the cool night air raising goosebumps on her arms. The porch light cast a warm, yellow circle around her, illuminating the determined set of her jaw. She stood there, small but resolute, and stared directly across the quiet street where several motorcycles were parked haphazardly, their chrome gleaming under the moonlight, their riders lounging, silhouetted against the darkness. Do you boys find some special kind of satisfaction in tormenting an old woman? Her voice, though thin with age, carried across the stillness, remarkably steady, as calm and clear as the surface of the creek before dawn. Don't you have anything more productive to occupy your time? A moment of surprised silence hung in the air, then erupted into coarse, derisive laughter. One figure detached himself from the group and swaggered forward, stepping into the edge of the porch light's glow. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, his bare arms a canvas of swirling, intricate tattoos. Clara could make out a snarling wolf's head curling aggressively around one bicep, its fangs bared. A cigarette dangled nonchalantly from the corner of his mouth, its tip glowing red in the darkness. He appraised her with eyes that were cold and dismissive, as if she were nothing more than an insignificant insect buzzing annoyingly in his path. "Just having a little fun, Grandma," he sneered, the word grandma dripping with condescending mockery. He took a deliberate drag from his cigarette, exhaling a plume of smoke that drifted towards her. "Times are changing. This house, this nice piece of land, it ain't really meant for folks like you anymore. Time to move on, like old man Henderson did down the road." Packed up quick when he got the right offer. Clara's eyes, usually soft with kindness, narrowed into sharp, assessing points. Henderson. She remembered hearing the rumors swirling around town, whispers at the diner and the post office. A smooth-talking representative from some big city development firm, Sterling Properties they called it, had been making the rounds, flashing impressive sums of cash, try to buy up properties along the ridge overlooking the valley. Prime real estate, they claimed, perfect for luxury vacation homes or maybe even a golf resort. She herself had received several persistent, unwelcome calls, followed by glossy brochures delivered to her mailbox, all of which she had politely but firmly refused. This house, this land, wasn't just property to be bought and sold like a commodity. It was the anchor of her life, saturated with the ghosts of shared laughter, whispered secrets, George's patient gardening, the first steps of their children. It was history. It was love. It was home. Suddenly, the random harassment clicked into focus, forming a grim, unpleasant picture. The Crimson Reapers weren't just bored delinquents seeking kicks. They were instruments, messengers delivering a threat wrapped in noise and vandalism. Someone with deep pockets, someone like Sterling Properties, wanted her gone. And they were using this pack of local thugs to apply pressure, to make her life so uncomfortable, so frightening, that she would finally break and accept their offer. But Clara Hayes wouldn't break. She had faced far worse than sneering bikers and developers' veiled threats. She wouldn't relinquish her home, her memories, her life. Not for them. Not for anyone. That quiet, unwavering defiance, blooming stubbornly in the face of intimidation, would, as it turned out, carry a heavy price. Part 2. The Siege. The days that followed Clara's front porch confrontation bled into a week, then stretched towards 2, each one marked by a subtle but undeniable tightening of the siege. The Crimson Reapers didn't retreat. They doubled down, their tactics becoming more brazen, more destructive, more personal. The thin veil of random mischief was discarded entirely, replaced by a campaign of deliberate, targeted intimidation designed to erode Clara's resolved peace by agonizing peace. Every time Clara stepped outside her front door, she braced herself, steeling her nerve for the discovery of some new violation. One morning, she found her sturdy garden hose slashed cleanly in 2, water pooling uselessly on the grass near the spigot. Another day, several garbage bags ripped open and spilling their foul contents rotting food scraps, greasy fast food wrappers, empty liquor bottles had been dumped deliberately by her back door, the stench fouling the morning air. The small, ceramic garden angel, a gift from her granddaughter Emily years ago, which had sat serenely amidst her petunias near the front steps for over 3 decades, was found shattered into a dozen pieces, its tiny wings broken, lying like casualties on the flagstone path. Each incident felt like a small, calculated wound inflicted not just on her property, but on her spirit, on the sanctity of her home. She reported the incidents, of course. She made the slow, deliberate walk down to the small, brick building that housed the Harmony Creek Sheriff's Department and Town Hall. Sheriff Brody listened patiently, his brow furrowed with what seemed like genuine sympathy, meticulously writing down the details in his worn notebook. He promised to increase patrols, to keep an eye out, but Clara could see the weariness in his eyes, the resignation of a man overwhelmed and outmatched. He spoke vaguely of needing more evidence, of the difficulty in catching them in the act. His reassurances felt hollow, offering little comfort against the relentless tide of harassment. Some neighbors offered quiet words of support, usually murmured over the fence or during brief encounters at the general store. Mildred Peterson, her neighbor to the east, a woman whose curtains seemed to perpetually twitch with observation, brought over a still-warm apple crumble and expressed her outrage, though her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper when she mentioned the Reapers by name. Young Billy Parker, who mowed Clara's lawn occasionally, offered to keep an eye out too, but the nervous shifting of his weight and the way he avoided direct eye contact told Clara he was more frightened than helpful. Most townsfolk, however, seemed to adopt the council's preferred strategy: look the other way. Fear was a palpable current running beneath the town's placid surface. People were afraid of attracting the Reapers' attention themselves, afraid of retaliation, afraid of disrupting the fragile illusion of peace. Clara understood their fear, but it didn't lessen the profound sense of isolation that began to settle over her. The nights became the worst. Sleep offered little respite, fragmented by phantom engine noises and the persistent anxiety that gnawed at the edges of her consciousness. She'd lie awake in the darkness, the familiar creaks and groans of the old house now sounding amplified, potentially sinister. Was that a footstep on the porch? Was that sound the rattle of a window latch? She took to sleeping in her armchair in the living room, the sturdy oak cane propped beside her, the antique rotary phone on the end table within easy reach, though she still hesitated to make the call that lingered in the back of her mind. Calling 911 felt increasingly futile. Sheriff Brody could do little more than file another report. The other number, the one tied to a promise made nearly half a century ago, felt like invoking a force she wasn't entirely sure she was ready to unleash. She tried small deterrents. She installed a brighter motion-activated floodlight above the back door, hoping to startle any nocturnal intruders. It was promptly smashed with a rock the following night. She considered getting a dog, a loyal companion whose bark might offer some warning, but at 90, the responsibility of caring for an animal felt overwhelming. Her resilience, though formidable, was being chipped away, eroded by the constant tension, the lack of sleep, the feeling of being under siege in her own home. Doubt, an unwelcome visitor, began to whisper insidious questions in the quiet hours. Was it worth it? Was this house, these memories, worth living in constant fear? Maybe the developer's offer wasn't so bad after all. She pushed the thoughts away, ashamed of her own momentary weakness, clinging fiercely to the image of George's smiling face, to the feel of this house as the only true home she had known for most of her adult life. Then came the Saturday evening that tipped the scales, the incident that finally shattered her weary tolerance and forced her hand. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the western sky in breathtaking strokes of orange, pink, and gold. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the tall maple tree in her front yard, carrying the sweet, calming scent of lavender from the bushes flanking the porch steps. Clara was standing at her kitchen sink, rinsing the few dishes from her simple supper, gazing out the window at the tranquil scene, trying to soak in a moment of fragile peace. That peace was violently ripped apart by the sudden, terrifying roar of multiple engines. This wasn't the usual one or two bikes making a drive-by nuisance. This sounded different, heavier, more numerous. A wolf pack unleashed. Clara hurried to the front living room window, her heart suddenly pounding against her ribs with a painful intensity. Her hand, resting on her cane for support, trembled, not just with age, but with a surge of adrenaline and dread. At least 6, maybe 7, motorcycles came barreling up the quiet residential street, their riders hunched low, throttles wide open. They didn't slow down as they approached her cottage. They didn't stop on the road. To her horror, they swerved sharply, mounting the curb and rolling directly onto her meticulously kept front lawn. Their heavy tires churned deep ruts into the soft, green turf, shredding through the carefully tended flower beds, crushing the vibrant blooms of her late summer dahlias and marigolds under their spinning wheels like they were nothing more than weeds. One biker, younger than the others, with a shock of greasy blonde hair sticking out from under his helmet, popped a wheelie, balancing precariously on his back tire, letting out a whoop of exhilaration. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound, as a spinning rear tire kicked up clods of dirt and grass, spraying them across her clean white porch railings and the rocking chair where she often sat. Another rider, the same hulking figure with the wolf tattoo, she recognized as Jackson Jax Croft, the apparent leader, dismounted slowly. He swaggered towards her white picket fence, the one George had built and she had painstakingly repainted just last spring. He pulled a can of spray paint from inside his leather jacket. With deliberate, sweeping motions, he scrawled crude, angry red letters across the pristine white wood. "Get out." The message was stark, brutal, unambiguous. Clara stood frozen at the window, watching the destruction unfold, the violation of her sanctuary complete. The carefully constructed dam of her composure, worn thin by weeks of relentless pressure, finally broke. But it wasn't tears that flowed, nor screams of rage. Instead, a cold, hard clarity washed over her, sharp and bracing as a winter wind. The time for patience, for hoping the problem would simply disappear, for relying on ineffective authorities, was over. This wasn't about scaring her anymore. This was a declaration of war, an eviction notice delivered via intimidation and destruction. She turned away from the window, her jaw clenched so tightly it ached, her mind working with a precision she hadn't felt in years. She walked with determined steps back through the living room, past the cherished, framed black and white photograph of her and George on their wedding day, she, radiant in borrowed lace. He, endearingly awkward in his uniform. Past the shadow box on the wall, displaying her old, faded Red Cross armband and a couple of service medals, tangible reminders of a different kind of battle fought long ago. Her destination was the small den, George's old study, lined with bookshelves and smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and old paper. On the far wall, mounted beside a built-in bookcase filled with George's collection of history texts, hung an antique rotary telephone. Black, heavy Bakelite, the same phone they had used for decades, its ring a familiar, comforting sound from a bygone era. Her fingers, marked with the spots and stiffness of age, moved with surprising dexterity. She lifted the heavy receiver, listening for the familiar dial tone. Then, with deliberate, practiced motions, she dialed a number she hadn't called in over 40 years, a number committed to memory, linked to a debt incurred and a promise made under duress and gratitude. The line clicked, connecting across miles and decades. It rang once, a sharp, distinct sound in the tense quiet of the room. Then, a voice answered, deep, gravelly, laced with the weariness of years, but underpinned by an unmistakable note of authority. "Yeah." Clara didn't waste words on pleasantries or explanations. Her voice was calm, devoid of panic, imbued with the chilling gravity of her decision. "Marcus, it's Clara Hayes." A beat of silence stretched across the line, thick with unspoken history. She could almost hear the man on the other end processing the name, dredging up memories from a distant past. Then a slow intake of breath. "Clara," the voice repeated, softer now, tinged with concern, perhaps recognition. "It's been a long time." "Yes, it has," Clara acknowledged evenly. "I find myself in a situation, Marcus. I need to call on that favor." Another pause, longer this time. Clara pictured him older now, surely, perhaps graying, but likely still possessing the same steady gaze she remembered. She heard a faint rustling sound, maybe him shifting in a chair or running a hand over his face. "Tell me," he said simply. She gave him the barest outline, the harassment, the escalation, the destruction currently happening on her lawn, the name Crimson Reapers, the town Harmony Creek. She didn't embellish, didn't plead. She stated the facts. When she finished, the silence returned, but this time it felt different. Charged. Decisive. "We're on our way, Clara." The voice, Marcus Arcane, said, the gravelly tone now infused with a steely resolve that sent a shiver down her spine, not of fear, but of grim anticipation. "Just hold tight. Don't engage them further. Lock your doors. We'll handle it." "Thank you, Marcus," she whispered, the words catching slightly in her throat. "No thanks needed, Clara. Ever." "We're coming." The line clicked dead. Clara slowly, carefully, placed the heavy receiver back into its cradle. Outside, the sound of the Crimson Reaper's motorcycles still snarled, punctuated by their boisterous laughter and the sickening crunch of tires tearing up her beloved lawn. They were reveling in their perceived victory, confident in their power, utterly oblivious to the chain of events she had just set in motion. They had no inkling of the call she had just made, no concept of the identity of the man she had summoned, and certainly no preparedness for the storm that was, even now, gathering speed and heading directly towards Harmony Creek. Exactly 23 minutes later, a new sound began to intrude upon the Reaper's destructive celebration. It started as a low, distant hum, almost subliminal at first, easily mistaken for a passing truck on the highway miles away. But it grew steadily, deepening into a powerful, rhythmic rumble, fundamentally different from the high-pitched, ragged snarl of the Reaper's bikes. This was a sound that spoke of synchronized power, of heavy machinery moving with deliberate, inexorable force. The Crimson Reapers, caught mid-laugh and mid-vandalism, paused. Jax Croft lowered his spray paint can, cocking his head, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. The other bikers gradually cut their engines, the sudden relative silence amplifying the approaching roar. They exchanged uneasy glances, then turned their attention towards the bend in the road leading into town, the direction from which the sound originated. That's when they saw them. Emerging from the twilight haze, like phantoms materializing from the deepening shadows, came a formation of motorcycles. Not 6 or 7, but close to 20, moving with the tight, disciplined precision of a cavalry troop. They rode two abreast, their powerful engines producing a synchronized, thunderous roar that seemed to vibrate in the very air, a sound like controlled thunder rolling off distant mountains. The bikes themselves were larger, heavier, mostly classic American cruisers, meticulously maintained, gleaming even in the fading light. The riders were clad in matching black leather jackets, worn but clean, devoid of the Reaper's chaotic patches and studs. On the back of each jacket, stitched in striking silver thread that caught the last rays of the setting sun, was an identical emblem, a stylized, coiled serpent wrapped protectively around the hilt and blade of an upright medieval sword. The Sentinel Riders had arrived. Part 3. The Debt and the Riders. The man who answered Clara's call was Marcus Kane, known universally within his circle simply as Sarge. The nickname wasn't an affectation, it was earned. A decorated Vietnam veteran, Sarge carried the quiet authority and unshakable loyalty forged in the crucible of jungle warfare. His face, now deeply lined and framed by close-cropped gray hair, still held the piercing intensity of the young squad leader Clara remembered, albeit tempered by decades of life lived on his own terms. The gravel in his voice wasn't just age. It was the residue of shouted commands under fire, of long nights spent talking down scared young men, of years breathing exhaust fumes on open highways. The favor Clara Hayes had called in was rooted deep in the mud and chaos of a makeshift field hospital near Da Nang, nearly 50 years ago. Marcus Kane, then a young, hard-charging sergeant barely into his 20s, had been brought in on a stretcher, riddled with shrapnel from a booby trap, bleeding profusely from multiple wounds, his life hanging by the slenderest of threads. The field hospital was overwhelmed, chaotic, doctors and nurses stretched impossibly thin, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the groans of the wounded. Resources were scarce, triage brutal. By all rights, Marcus should have been tagged as a low priority, his chances deemed too slim. But Nurse Eleanor Ellie Hayes, she hadn't taken George's name, yet saw something in the fierce, flickering defiance in the young sergeant's eyes. Against protocol, against the weary advice of an overworked surgeon, she refused to give up on him. For hours, she worked tirelessly, cleaning his wounds with meticulous care, applying pressure bandages with steady hands despite the tremors of exhaustion threatening to overtake her. She bullied a reluctant corpseman into finding more plasma, argued fiercely for the surgeon's attention when a critical moment arrived, and through the long, terrifying night, she stayed by his side, monitoring his vitals, offering sips of water, murmuring words of encouragement, her calm presence a small anchor in the storm of pain and fear. She saved his life, not just through skill, though her nursing was exemplary, but through sheer, stubborn refusal to let another young soldier die on her watch if there was even a glimmer of hope. When Marcus was finally stable enough to be evacuated, his eyes, hazy with morphine but lucid, found hers. He couldn't speak much, his throat raw, but he managed a hoarse whisper, his hand weakly gripping her arm. "I owe you. Anything. Ever." Clara, accustomed to the desperate promises of men facing mortality, had simply smiled tiredly, patted his hand, and said, "Just get well, Sergeant. Go home. We'll have a good life. That's payment enough." Marcus came to get well. He went home, bearing the physical and invisible scars of war. He tried civilian life, but the structure, the camaraderie, the sense of purpose he'd found in the military, even amidst the horror, was missing. Like many veterans adrift in a country that didn't quite understand their experiences, he gravitated towards others who shared that bond, that unspoken understanding. He found it on two wheels. He didn't fall in with the lawless elements often associated with motorcycle clubs. Instead, he co-founded the Sentinel Riders Motorcycle Club. It wasn't a gang in the criminal sense. It was a brotherhood, primarily composed of veterans, later expanding to include former law enforcement officers, firefighters, and other men who valued discipline, loyalty, and a shared code of conduct. Their emblem, the serpent coiled around the sword, symbolized vigilance, protection, and the readiness to strike against injustice, but only when necessary, only when justified. They weren't vigilantes seeking trouble, but they fiercely protected their own and those they deemed worthy of their shield. They organized charity rides, escorted funeral processions for fallen servicemen, and provided a network of support for members struggling with PTSD or the challenges of readjusting to civilian life. They had chapters scattered across several states, operating quietly, maintaining a low profile, their reputation known only within certain circles respected by some, warily regarded by others, but never trifled with lightly. The call from Clara Hayes had resonated through the decades, instantly transporting Sarge back to that humid, blood-soaked tent in Vietnam. He hadn't forgotten Nurse Hayes, her calm eyes, her steady hands, the quiet determination that had pulled him back from the brink. The debt he felt wasn't a casual promise. It was a profound, life-altering obligation etched into his soul. Her voice, though aged, carried the same quiet strength he remembered. Hearing that she was being harassed, threatened, her home vandalized by scum like the Crimson Reapers, a group whose reputation for petty thuggery and intimidation was known to the Sentinels, ignited a cold fury within him. Within minutes of hanging up the phone, Sarge had activated the Sentinel Riders network. Calls went out, concise and urgent. The message was simple: Sarge is calling in a marker. Major priority. Rally Point, Harmony Creek. ETA ASAP. No questions were asked about the why. The who Sarge was enough. Riders from the nearest chapters, some within an hour's ride, others further afield, dropped whatever they were doing. They were mechanics, construction workers, retired cops, small business owners. They donned their leathers, fired up their meticulously maintained Harleys and Indians, the deep rumble of V-twin engines echoing a shared purpose. They converged, riding hard and fast, converging on the designated routes leading towards the small, unassuming town where a 90-year-old woman had finally decided enough was enough. Their arrival wasn't a chaotic descent. It was a calculated display of controlled power. They rolled into Harmony Creek not with the belligerent roar of the Reapers, but with the deep, synchronized thunder of disciplined force. They moved past the town square, past the wide-eyed patrons peering out the windows of Millie's Diner, past Sheriff Brody's empty patrol car parked outside the station, their formation tight, their expressions hidden behind sunglasses or helmet visors, but radiating an aura of unwavering resolve. As they rounded the final bend onto Clara Street, Sarge was in the lead, his silver-gray hair visible beneath his customary black bandana. He took in the scene with a quick, practiced scan. The pack of smaller, less impressive bikes scattered across the desecrated lawn, the crude graffiti marring the white fence. The group of reapers standing frozen, their initial bravado evaporating into visible apprehension. He saw Jax Croft, recognizing the type instantly, all bluster and bully tactics, dangerous to the vulnerable, but likely cowardly when faced with genuine strength. Sarge raised his left hand, a simple, almost casual gesture. Behind him, the 20 engines throttled down in perfect unison, the deafening roar subsiding into a menacing, rhythmic idle, a low growl that filled the suddenly tense air. The Sentinel riders fanned out, forming a silent, imposing cordon along the street, effectively blocking any easy escape for the Reapers, their headlights cutting bright swaths through the gathering dusk, pinning the Reapers in their glare. They didn't dismount immediately. They just sat there, astride their powerful machines, a wall of black leather, gleaming chrome, and palpable menace, their collective gaze fixed on the Crimson Reapers. The laughter and jeering had long since died on the Reapers' lips. The color drained from Jax Croft's face, replaced by a mixture of disbelief and dawning fear. He clearly hadn't anticipated this level of response, this sudden appearance of a disciplined, organized force. He exchanged nervous glances with his own members, who were shifting uncomfortably, their earlier aggression melting away like snow in a sudden thaw. They were outnumbered, outmachined, and clearly outclassed in terms of sheer intimidation. Finally, Sarge swung his leg over his bike, the heavy leather creaking in the quiet. He planted his boots firmly on the asphalt, his movements deliberate, unhurried. He removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were steely gray, narrowed, and utterly devoid of fear or compromise. He surveyed the damage to Clara's lawn, his gaze lingering for a moment on the spray-painted fence, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Then, he turned his full attention to Jax Croft, who was trying, and failing, to project an air of nonchalance. Sarge began to walk slowly, deliberately, towards the Reaper's leader, his boots crunching softly on the gravel shoulder of the road. He stopped a few feet away, close enough for Jax to see the intricate detail on the Sentinel rider's patch, close enough to feel the radiating intensity of the older man's presence. The other Sentinels remained mounted, silent Sentinels, their engines alow, throbbing promise of contained power. "Jackson Croft," Sarge stated, his voice low but carrying easily in the charged silence. It wasn't a question. "Leader of this outfit?" He gestured dismissively towards the Reapers and their bikes. Jax visibly swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. He tried to muster some bravado. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice lacking its earlier sneering confidence. "This ain't your business." Sarge allowed a small, humorless smile to touch his lips. "My name is Marcus Kane. Most call me Sarge." And when someone messes with Clara Hayes, he tilted his head slightly towards the cottage, where Clara was now visible, standing silhouetted in her doorway, watching. "It becomes my business. It becomes the business of the Sentinel Riders." He took another step closer, invading Jax's personal space. "See, you boys made a mistake. A big one. You picked on the wrong house. You harassed the wrong woman." Sarge's voice dropped lower, becoming almost conversational, yet infinitely more menacing. "This lady? She's under our protection. Effective immediately." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He glanced pointedly at the spray-painted fence. "That paint, that lawn, you're going to fix it. Right now." Jax scoffed, a reflexive flicker of defiance. "Like hell we are. You can't just dash." Sarge didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply held Jax's gaze, his own eyes like chips of granite. "You misunderstand the situation, son," he said quietly. "That wasn't a request. You and your boys are going to clean up every bit of mess you made. You're going to find some grass seed and topsoil. You're going to scrub that paint off that fence until it's spotless, or you're going to replace the damn pickets. and you're going to do it with respect." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper, audible only to Jax but radiating outwards like a cold wave. "And then? You're going to get on your bikes, you're going to ride out of Harmony Creek, and you're never going to bother Mrs. Hayes or anyone else in this town again. Am I making myself clear?" Behind Sarge, the 20 Sentinel riders remained motionless, their presence a silent, overwhelming endorsement of their leader's words. The low rumble of their idling engines seemed to underscore the threat. Jax looked from Sarge's unyielding face to the silent wall of bikers, then back at his own increasingly anxious crew. The calculation was simple, brutal, and unavoidable. Their little reign of terror was definitively over. Part 4. Reckoning and Restoration. The standoff crackled with unspoken violence, a thick tension settling over the quiet residential street. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the scene in dramatic hues of orange and purple, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the motorcycle headlights. Jax Croft stood, trapped between the immovable object of Sarge's quiet ultimatum and the palpable fear radiating from his own gang members. The Crimson Reapers, moments before swaggering vandals, now looked like cornered animals, glancing nervously between the imposing line of Sentinel riders and their suddenly uncertain leader. Jax's face flushed, a mixture of humiliation and impotent rage warring within him. He was used to being the intimidator, the one dishing out fear, not receiving it. Being dressed down like a misbehaving child by this old biker, in front of his own crew and the woman he'd been terrorizing, was galling. But the cold, hard reality was unavoidable. The sheer number of Sentinel riders, their disciplined silence, the palpable aura of controlled power they projected, it was a different league entirely from the petty bullying the Reapers specialized in. Pushing back wasn't defiance, it would be suicide. He shot a venomous glare towards Clara's house, a silent promise of future retribution he likely wouldn't be able to keep. Then, his gaze dropped, focusing somewhere around Sarge's worn leather boots. "All right," he mumbled, the word choked with resentment. "All right, we'll clean it up." Sarge didn't react, his expression unchanging. He simply nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture. "Good. Get started. Now." He turned slightly, addressing the other Reapers who were still straddling their bikes or standing awkwardly on the ruined lawn. "All of you, find brooms, rags, buckets. There's a hose spigot around back, I imagine. Someone get water. Someone else can start picking up that trash you dumped earlier. And find something to scrape that paint off gently. You damage that fence further, you'll answer to me personally." His tone left no room for argument. Reluctantly, sullenly, the Crimson Reapers began to move. They avoided eye contact with the Sentinels, their movements clumsy and resentful. One disappeared around the side of the house, presumably in search of the hose. Others started gathering the scattered pieces of the broken ceramic angel with ill grace. Jax himself, after a moment of internal struggle, walked stiffly towards his bike and retrieved a multi-tool from his saddlebag, heading towards the defaced picket fence with murder in his eyes, but compliance in his actions. While the Reapers began the humiliating task of undoing their own vandalism under the watchful eyes of the Sentinels, Sarge turned and walked towards Clara's porch. His steps were measured, respectful. He stopped at the bottom step, looking up at Clara, who still stood in the doorway, her small frame silhouetted against the warm light from inside. "Mrs. Hayes," Sarge said, his voice softening considerably, the gravelly edge smoothed by respect and perhaps a touch of emotion. "Clara, are you all right?" Clara nodded slowly, her hand still resting on her cane, though the trembling had subsided. She managed a small, weary smile. "I'm now Marcus. Thank you." Her eyes scanned the line of silent riders sitting astride their powerful machines, a formidable barrier between her and the chaos. "Thank you all." "No thanks necessary, ma'am," Sarge repeated firmly. "Like I said, we owed you. Some debts don't expire." He gestured towards the Reapers scrubbing ineptly at the fence. "They'll clean this up, and they won't be back. You have my word on that." I believe you, Marcus, Clara said simply. She trusted the conviction in his voice, the quiet authority that radiated from him. A few of the Sentinel riders dismounted, walking over to inspect the damage to the lawn and flower beds more closely. One, a burly man with a thick beard, knelt, examining the deep tire ruts with a frown. Another picked up a crushed dahlia bloom, shaking his head slowly. There was no conversation, just a shared sense of quiet disapproval of the needless destruction. The cleanup process was slow and grudging. The reapers worked inefficiently, hampered by their resentment and lack of proper tools. Jax scraped furiously at the red paint, managing to remove some, but also scratching the white wood beneath. Others swept debris into untidy piles or tried awkwardly to pat down the torn-up turf. The Sentinel riders watched impassively, their mere presence ensuring the work continued, however poorly. As dusk deepened into true night, the porch light and the motorcycle headlights provided the only illumination. The air grew cooler. Clara remained on her porch, a silent observer. Sarge stayed near the steps, occasionally issuing a quiet directive to the reapers. Get that corner, don't miss that pile. He wasn't supervising a work crew. He was enforcing a penance. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 2 hours, the reapers had done what they could. The graffiti was mostly gone, though faint red stains and scratches remained on the fence pickets. The trash was bagged, the larger debris cleared from the lawn, though the deep tire ruts and crushed flowers remained as ugly scars. It was a superficial cleanup at best, but it was clear the reapers were spent, their humiliation complete. Jax Croft threw down his rag in disgust. There, he spat, avoiding Sarge's eyes. It's done. Sarge surveyed the yard slowly, his gaze missing nothing. He walked over to the fence, running a calloused hand over the marred wood. He looked at the torn lawn. He knew it wasn't perfect, wasn't fully restored. But the point had been made. The dominance established. The debt partially paid in sweat and humiliation. All right, Sarge said finally, his voice flat. Load up your trash. Take it with you. And then get out of this town. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over each reaper individually. And remember what I said. You ever come back here, you ever bother Mrs. Hayes or anyone else in Harmony Creek again, you'll deal with all of us. He gestured towards the silent line of sentinels. And trust me, son, you don't want that. Without another word, fueled by simmering resentment and relief, the Crimson Reapers scrambled to gather the bags of trash, stuffing them awkwardly onto their bikes. They mounted quickly, engines sputtering to life with none of their earlier bravado. Jax Croft shot one last, hateful look towards Clara's house, then kicked his bike into gear. Led by their humbled leader, the Crimson Reapers rode away, their taillights disappearing down the road, leaving behind only the lingering smell of exhaust fumes and the deep rumble of the Sentinels' idling engines. Silence descended once more, broken only by the rhythmic throb of the remaining motorcycles and the chirping of crickets. The Sentinel riders didn't immediately leave. A few more dismounted, joining the bearded man who was still assessing the lawn damage. This lawn's gonna need more than patting down, Sarge, the bearded man observed quietly. Needs proper fill, maybe some sod. Another rider nodded, pointing towards the fence. And these pickets are scraped up bad. Paint won't cover it right. Should be replaced. Sarge listened, nodding slowly. He turned back to Clara. Mrs. Hayes, we can have some of our guys come back tomorrow in the daylight. Properly fix this fence, work on the lawn. We have members skilled in this kind of work. It's the least we can do. Clara looked at the damage, then at Sarge's earnest face, and the faces of the other riders nearby, their expressions unexpectedly gentle beneath the gruff, leather-clad exteriors. That's very kind of you, Marcus. But you've done more than enough already. It's no trouble, ma'am, Sarge insisted. We don't like leaving a job half-finished. Especially not for you. He looked around at the quiet street, the darkened houses of neighbors who had likely watched the entire drama unfold from behind drawn curtains. Besides, he added, a wry note entering his voice, gives the town something positive to talk about regarding bikers for a change. Clara considered it for a moment, then nodded gratefully. "All right, Marcus. If you're sure, I'd appreciate that very much." "Consider it done," Sarge confirmed. He made a few quiet arrangements with his men. 2 riders would stay parked unobtrusively down the street through the night, just as a precaution, ensuring the Reapers didn't have any foolish second thoughts about returning immediately. The rest would head back, with a small crew designated to return in the morning with tools and supplies. One by one, the remaining Sentinel riders started their engines, the powerful roar momentarily filling the night again before settling into a synchronized departure. They nodded respectfully towards Clara as they pulled away, their headlights sweeping across the yard before disappearing around the bend, leaving only Sarge and the 2 designated watchers behind. Sarge walked back up to the porch steps. "You should get inside now, Clara. Lock your doors. Get some rest. You're safe." "I know I am, Marcus," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "After all these years, I never thought I'd make that call." Sarge met her gaze, his expression softening. "I never forgot, Clara. What you did for me back then, some things you carry with you. Always." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything at all, you still have my number. Don't wait 40 years next time." A small, genuine smile touched Clara's lips. "I won't, Marcus. Thank you." He gave a final nod, then turned and walked back towards his own motorcycle parked to the curb. He swung his leg over, settled into the seat, and with a final glance towards her lighted doorway, he fired up the engine. Its deep rumble was a comforting sound now, a promise of protection kept. He pulled away slowly, joining the 2 riders parked further down the street, their presence a silent, reassuring vigil in the quiet darkness. Clara watched until his taillight disappeared. Then she turned, stepped back inside her small cottage, and closed the door, sliding the deadbolt firmly into place. The house was quiet, the earlier vibrations and menacing shadows gone. The air still felt charged, but the fear had receded, replaced by a profound sense of exhaustion and a complex mix of gratitude and lingering unease. She walked through the living room, her hand brushing against the frame of George's picture. The battle was over for now. The siege was lifted. Thanks to a decades-old debt and the unwavering loyalty of the Sentinel Riders, her sanctuary, though scarred, was still hers. Part 5. The Scars and the Sentinels. The following morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect late summer day that usually filled Clara with quiet contentment. Sunlight streamed through her windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and highlighting the faint, lingering scent of lavender from the undisturbed bushes near the back door. But today, the beauty felt slightly marred, overlaid with the unsettling memories of the previous night. Clara moved through her morning routine with practiced slowness, the events of the evening replaying in her mind. The roar of engines, the shattering of the angel, the angry red graffiti, the fear tightening its grip, and then the arrival of the Sentinels, the confrontation, Sarge's calm authority, the Reaper's sullen retreat. It felt surreal, like scenes from a movie witnessed rather than lived. Looking out her front window, she saw the 2 Sentinel riders still parked discreetly down the street, keeping their silent vigil. One was leaning against his bike, reading a paperback, the other sipping coffee from a thermos. Their presence was a tangible reassurance, a visible symbol that the protection Sarge promised was real. Around mid-morning, as Sarge had indicated, a sturdy-looking pickup truck towing a small utility trailer pulled up in front of the cottage, followed by 3 more Sentinel riders on their motorcycles. Sarge wasn't among them this time, but the arriving men moved with the same quiet efficiency. The leader of the small crew, the burly, bearded man from the night before who introduced himself simply as Bear, approached her porch respectfully. "Mornin', Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice a surprisingly gentle rumble. "Sarge sent us to finish the cleanup, like he promised. We brought some supplies, topsoil, seed, a couple of new fence pickets, paint. We'll try to make it right." Clara invited them to use the hose, offered them coffee, which they politely declined, and then watched from her porch rocking chair as they set to work. Unlike the Crimson Reaper's resentful efforts, the Sentinels worked with skill and purpose. Bear and another man carefully removed the damaged fence pickets, measuring and cutting new ones from lumber on the trailer. They sanded the remaining marred sections smooth before applying a fresh coat of gleaming white paint, meticulously matching the existing color. The other two men tackled the ravaged lawn. They carefully raked away the remaining debris, broke up the compacted earth in the tire ruts, and mixed in bags of rich topsoil. They smoothed the surface, scattered grass, seed generously, and lightly watered the patched areas. They even took the time to gently prune the broken stems on her crushed dahlias and marigolds, trying to salvage what they could. They worked steadily, speaking little amongst themselves, their movements economical and practiced. It was clear they were skilled craftsmen, taking pride in their work, even when that work was repairing damage caused by others. As they worked, a few curious neighbors emerged. Mildred Peterson peered shamelessly from behind her curtains before venturing out, ostensibly to water her marigolds, though her attention was clearly fixed on the unexpected activity at Clara's house. Mr. Henderson, the hardware store owner, slowed his car as he drove past, giving the bikers a long, appraising look. Even Sheriff Brody drove by slowly, rolling down his window to exchange a few quiet words with Bear, nodding before driving off again, a look of something akin to relief on his face. The town was watching, processing this new, unexpected facet of the biker presence. These men weren't spreading fear. They were mending fences, literally and figuratively. By early afternoon, the work was done. The new fence pickets blended almost seamlessly, the fresh paint gleaming in the sun. The lawn, though clearly patched, looked much healthier, the ugly scars smoothed over, holding the promise of new growth. The overall sense of violation had significantly lessened, replaced by a feeling of restoration. Bear and his crew packed up their tools, refusing Clara's renewed offers of refreshment or payment. "Sarge's orders, ma'am," Bear said with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He said taking care of this was payment enough for him. Just glad we could help set things right. He handed her a small, potted lavender plant. Thought maybe this could replace some of what got trampled. Clara accepted the plant, deeply touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Bear. Thank you all. Please tell Marcus thank you again for me." "Will do, Mrs. Hayes," Bear assured her. "You take care now. And like Sarge said, you got his number if anything else comes up. Anything at all." With final nods, the Sentinels mounted their bikes and rode off, leaving Clara alone once more, the rumble of their engines fading into the quiet afternoon. She stood on her porch for a long time, the small lavender pot warm in her hands, surveying the repaired fence, the mended lawn. The scars were still there, visible if you looked closely, just as the invisible scars from the war remained etched on her soul. But they were reminders not just of violation, but of resilience, of help arriving from unexpected quarters, of debts honored across decades. Later that day, one of her children called her son Jack from California. She kept her voice light, talking about the weather, her garden, mentioning the new lavender plant, but omitting the reason for its acquisition, and asking about the grandchildren. She didn't tell him about the Crimson Reapers, the harassment, the terrifying climax, or the intervention of the Sentinel Riders. It would only worry him needlessly, make him feel helpless from thousands of miles away. Some battles, she reflected, were best fought quietly, some burdens carried alone, or shared only with those who truly understood the weight. In the following weeks, a subtle shift occurred in Harmony Creek. The Crimson Reapers were gone, vanished as quickly as they had arrived. There were whispers about Sheriff Brody having a stern talk with Jax Croft's parents, who still lived in the next county over. But most people suspected the real deterrent was the memory of 20 imposing Sentinel Riders and the quiet authority of their leader. The name Sterling Properties also faded from local gossip. Apparently, their aggressive attempts to buy upland ceased abruptly after the incident at Clara's place. Perhaps the developer realized that some properties came with unforeseen, formidable protectors. Life for Clara slowly settled back into its familiar rhythm, yet it wasn't quite the same. The peace felt less fragile now, bolstered by the knowledge that she wasn't entirely alone, that help existed beyond the town's limited resources. She still felt a pang when she looked at the repaired fence or the patches on her lawn, but it was tempered with gratitude. She carefully tended the lavender plant Bear had given her, placing it near the spot where her ceramic angel used to sit. She never saw Sarge or the Sentinel Riders again, though she kept the slip of paper with Marcus Kane's number tucked safely in her nightstand drawer, beside the letters tied with ribbons. She didn't expect to ever need it again, but knowing it was there provided a quiet comfort. The favor had been called in, the debt repaid, not with money, but with action, loyalty, and the restoration of peace. At 90 years old, Clara Hayes knew that life inevitably leaves scars. She bore them from a world war fought long ago, from the loss of her beloved George, and now from the siege of her home. But she also knew that scars could signify healing, resilience, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. As she sat in her rocking chair on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky, the scent of lavender sweetening the air, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her once more. Her sanctuary, defended and restored, remained her own, and she, its quiet sentinel, remained unbroken. The steel forged in war, tempered by time, and tested once more, had held.